Sunder is the General Manager Training for GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals in India. He's based in Mumbai, as is one other of our guests today on this webinar. He's passionate about digital learning and the possibilities it opens up in modern day workplaces. And he's led the learning function across multiple industries: healthcare, financial services and technology, and now pharmaceuticals. And he's been a regular speaker at the Learning Technology Conference since 2015. So Sunder, you're very welcome today. We're delighted to see you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on wherever you're joining from. Great to be here, Nigel, and really looking forward to this conversation. So what I'm going to do over the next 20 minutes or so is to really talk about what we need to do within enterprise learning post-launching a learning platform. Now, this could be a traditional learning management system, a modern learning experience platform, any form of a sales enablement application or what have you. So really, some of the lessons that I'm going to be drawing from are platform agnostic, but really focused on the mechanics of what enterprise learning teams need to focus on to really make your platform engaging, sticky, keep getting the users back on them, and really add in a meaningful way to the commercial outcomes that all of us are supporting in different businesses. So really, that'll be my focus over the next 20 minutes or so. With that, let me actually, set a little bit of a context in terms of why did we need a learning platform and what the journey has been over the course of the last 1 year or so. So as Nigel said, I am based in Mumbai in India, which is one of the key emerging markets for GSK. GSK, as many of you may know, is a very large global healthcare company with operations in over 100 countries across the world. And a key part of the business sits in the emerging markets. India is obviously one of the bigger countries within that region, but we also have other big countries like China, Brazil, Russia, smaller countries in Asia Pacific, Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America. So really, I think, if you take away the US and Europe, I mean, emerging markets literally represents the rest of the world, maybe perhaps minus Australia and Japan, right? So it's a very large region, 40 countries, 10 different languages in which business happens, 10,000 plus commercial colleagues. And when I use the term commercial colleagues, what I'm specifically referring to is colleagues who are in sales and marketing roles. In our business, people who are in sales roles essentially are in field-based sales. So these are not folks who are working out of an office environment, but literally, meeting customers and, they're entrepreneurs in a certain sense, right? They're running their own territories and managing a budget in that sense. So very large workforce, and I'm sure some of the challenges that I've sort of surfaced on the slide may resonate with many of you in different industries. So very heterogeneous workforce. Whatever we do, we got to deliver at scale, and we've got to be able to do it in a very cost-effective, and more importantly, how do we really embed learning in the flow of work? Because like I said, these are not traditional office-based workers, so it's really important to ensure that you're not sort of disrupting the flow of work while you introduced learning platforms and things like that. So that's really the context. At a wider level as an organization, one of the key themes within the broader human resources function within GSK is keep growing. So there's a consistent and a very focused effort on ensuring that our colleagues across the world keep growing. Now, whether this is for people who are in commercial roles, but also for people who are in research and development, manufacturing, but really that's a consistent theme that we talk about across the world from a human resource point of view. And just last year, we made the transition. We made a transition from a traditional learning management system to a more modern, more cloud-based learning experience platform. So what I'm referring to today is essentially built on the SAP SuccessFactors platform. So we actually upgraded in order to make sure that we have something slightly more intuitive and consumer class. And that's the journey that we've been on over the course of the last 1 year. Now, we launched the platform in May of last year, so roughly about a year back. And there are 4 pillars around which we built everything. I mean, the first is really the context. I mean, what's the reason, what's the compelling reason for any commercial colleague to even come and engage with the platform? How do you enhance the employee experience? That's a key part. What's the content strategy? So we were thoughtful about what sort of content is going to really drive engagement within the platform. And then obviously being mindful about the launch experience. And this is where, the ability of the enterprise learning teams to really think like marketeers comes into play. So those are the 4 areas that we prioritized in terms of investments and also in terms of, things that we're going to track on an ongoing basis. And that's what we've been doing over the last 1 year. So what I'm going to walk you through today are some of these things. How do you establish community managers? If you are in a large global organization, the role that community managers can play to keep the engagement going. How do you create learning admins who can do analytics, who can actually track what sort of traffic you're seeing on the platform, what's driving traction? How do you really build partnership with external content providers? And as many of you may know, the external content ecosystem is just getting richer and richer, right? So how do you really establish meaningful partnerships? How do you refresh content in a very dynamic way, right? And how do you communicate, literally run a communication campaign on an ongoing basis, right? Rather than just a one and done type of an approach. And then more importantly, because it's really important that we embed all of this into the life into the day in the life of a learner, as an example. So how do you integrate with existing HR processes that you may have, whether it's performance management, performance appraisal, or what have you? So those are really the key. It's really an executive summary of what perhaps I will reflect on as we move forward. So what are the strategies that really you should be thoughtful about, and what are the lessons we've learned? So really 5 strategies that we've seen help build meaningful engagement. The first one being having a very thought through content strategy, thinking like marketeers within learning, having partnerships with learners, so getting a lot of user-generated content, establishing credentials, so testimonials, use cases, showing the benefits, and then tracking and progressing on an ongoing basis, right? So these are really the 5 pillars, if you will, of what you want to keep in mind when you're launching and you're looking at sustainable engagement within learning platforms of any kind. So I'm going to start with the content strategy, right? And this is an area we've spent a lot of time on. And broadly over the course of the year, we've figured now that there are 3 types of content that drive traffic. So what you see on the left is the first, which is proprietary content. Now, we're in a business which is driven by scientific content. So there's a lot of things that you can't get from external libraries. So there's a set of content we build in-house using in-house teams, in-house tools, and in-house capabilities. And this is really important because this brings in the deep context and relevance that people in commercial roles are looking at. The second is off the shelf, and this is where you've got multitude of options. So we leverage platforms which are, I'm sure many of you are, LinkedIn Learning, Get Abstract, Harvard Managed Mentor, Gartner, so on and so forth. So this is where much of the leadership skills, much of the general behavioral skills, where the fundamentals are the same, really we leverage content from these platforms. And the third is micro-learning content, and we've got a very specific and deliberate strategy around that, which is really about getting the learners into the picture. So significant part of our micro-learning content actually gets generated by people in roles who are not L&D. These are salespeople, these are marketing managers, and they are actually putting out content that they believe would be useful to people like them, right? So our learning content strategy is really based around these 3 pillars, and we're always trying to evaluate the mix of, what do we need to prioritize at a given point in time, depending on what skills you're building and depending on what problems that you're solving for. So that's really the content strategy. So you've got to be thoughtful and clear about what is the content strategy for your learning platforms as you get on this journey. And that's been a big reflection and learning for us over the course of the year. And again, you've got to have the right balance of proprietary and off-the-shelf content, right? You don't want to be doing all the heavy lifting yourself. We've made the mistake in the past of building a lot of, for example, leadership material in-house, only to learn that, we shouldn't have even done that in the first place, because what can you say about things like leadership, customer centricity, digitization that hasn't been said before. So there are areas where you must lean on already the great content that exists in external libraries, and there could be other areas that you may prioritize to build out internally, and that's a distinction that you must make early.
Sundar,
Nigel,
can I just...
did you have a question
yes.
there?
There are a few kind of basic questions that have come up in the question book, which I just ask you to quickly answer before we move on. The first one is, what is your LMS platform now?
Oh, it still is SAP SuccessFactors.
Okay.
What we've done with the learning experience is really sort of created a consumer grade layer on top of the traditional LMS, essentially.
That's very helpful. The next one is, what content format do you find most people respond to? Is there a format? Is it a blend of written, video, imagery, or is it really focused on video, or does it not matter? It depends on how valuable the content is to people.
Well, you know, at a very high level, video, I mean, no prizes for guessing that. I mean, video is the form of content that drives the maximum amount of traffic. But again, to your point, I mean, it also depends on what you're trying to solve for. So sometimes simple things like checklists, as an example, when it solves a specific problem, sees a lot of traction. So it could be simple job aids. It could be, you know, HTML readouts. It could be micro videos, but just in terms of, if I were to categorize, it's typically the videos that drive the maximum traffic.
Yeah, okay. Finally, do you allow users to upload their own content?
Oh, yes, we do. So, and that's where it gets really interesting, because there are parts of the platform where users can actually collaborate and engage in, you know, social learning with each other, so they can share content, and all of this gets moderated. That's where the role of the community managers comes into play, to ensure sanity, to ensure that, you know, whatever users are putting out, actually one meets the standards, and also, you know, is sort of legitimate content in that sense. So yeah, that's where the community managers come into picture.
Can I just, one other question that's just popped up. Michelle says, how do you do this layer? Because we have SAP and it's not great for learning. So how have you turned something that's not great for learning into something that is great for learning?
Well, you know, good that you asked the question, Michelle. Well, it really depends on what version of SAP you're using. You know, SAP has been a legacy provider. I mean, obviously they've improved over the course of the last several years. We use SAP SuccessFactors. We use the most recent version. So maybe, you know, you could consider having a conversation with the provider to see if you could get an upgrade. So you know, the place to start is to check what version you're currently using. But the most recent version actually allows you a lot of consumer class capabilities, is what I can say.
Okay, thanks very much. On you go, Sundar. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm glad. I mean, please keep surfacing these questions as they come up. I'm happy to take those as we go along. So, okay. All right. So like I was saying, I mean, there's obviously quite a lot of interest in content. So you got to have the right blend of proprietary and off the shelf. The other piece that, you know, we've learned a lot about over the course of the last 1 year as we've been on this journey is really, how do you market your platform? And this isn't just about launch excellence. I think most companies that I've experienced with do a decent job when there is a launch event. So you create a lot of excitement around a new platform that's coming up, but how do you do this on an ongoing basis? And we've reflected on 3 strategies that we believe you know, create traction in terms of a marketing-like approach. The first one is really to have learner archetypes. So do you have content? I mean, what level of personalization can you do on your platform? So for example, in our platforms, we do personalization at the level of roles. So this isn't personalization at the level of the individual, but at the level of the role. So if you are a sales rep, then obviously what you're going to see is super customized to the role that you have within the organization. And the same is the case if you're a marketing manager or if you're a business manager, at that example. So I think that really helps drive engagement, because when people come in, they want to see things that are relevant to what they do within the enterprise, and that's important. The second is to have an ongoing multi-channel communication campaign. And what I mean specifically here is not limited just to launch. So emails, but also enterprise social networks. And I'm going to give you a very specific example of how we've leveraged our internal enterprise social network to great effect, specifically to serve this objective. And the last but important, how are you promoting the content and how are you talking about the workflow opportunities? So give you a specific example. If you are, great time to promote content around performance appraisals or leadership check-in or coaching conversations is the June-July timeframe, which is typically when most organizations would have like some sort of a formal mid-year check-in or a mid-year performance appraisal conversation. So there are several opportunities during the course of the year where you can actually promote specific type of content and create engagement and stickiness towards your learning platform. So again, being thoughtful about how you're going to successfully market the learning platform is quite important as well. And we've been using, our enterprise social network is Workplace by Facebook. I'm sure many of you may be familiar with this. It is exactly an internal, it's just like an internal Facebook, but obviously meant for the enterprise. And we've used it extensively. What do we use it for? We use it for a wide range of things. We use it to get leader testimonials. We get leaders getting on video talking about why it's important, what's a piece of content that they've personally enjoyed consuming. We get user testimonials. We talk about use cases on our enterprise social platform. So essentially, how are people using it to get better at their jobs and what benefits have they seen? So again, given that you could do a lot of rich media on most enterprise social networks, that becomes a fantastic channel to really have an ongoing conversation about learning platforms. But you've got to have a clear communication strategy around that. And this is where I strongly recommend that learning teams consider partnering with internal corporate communication teams or marketing teams, because they do this stuff really well, and that's precisely what we did. We worked very closely with our internal comms team to make sure that, the learning communication doesn't stand out. It actually becomes part of the larger enterprise messaging that we're doing on a fortnightly and on a monthly basis. Now, it's important to grow your learning community as well. As you launch a learning platform and you get on with it, you're going to have some sort of traction, right? How do you make it sticky? And how are you crowdsourcing content? I think these are pieces which require ongoing deliberation and discussion. So it's really about, what's going to keep bringing people back, and you've got to be thoughtful about it. The whole mindset of just because you've built it, people are going to come, that doesn't work, and I think most of us know better than that. But how are you going to be thinking about this? How are you revisiting learning experience, learning content, and creating a conversation, which is an ongoing conversation? And again, what are the areas where learner content works better? So you've got to also have a clear content strategy to say, well, here are the areas where user-generated content is going to give me significantly better results. So I'll give you a very specific example. Our experience has been that in sales-specific roles, and when it comes to building out selling skills as an example, user-generated content, especially user-generated video pitches. So we, for example, ask our users to share elevator pitches. And what are the best ways to go and pitch to a potential customer as an example? Now that content coming from a high-performing sales rep is significantly more appealing than something that can be created by internal learning teams. So you've got to be clear about what are the areas where user-generated content is going to be useful, and then really have a thoughtful approach around that. That builds a lot of engagement and stickiness on your learning platform as well. Nigel, did you have a question there?
Hear me now. Yes, there are a lot of questions, Sunder, coming through. They won't let you off with this layers on the SAP. Someone is asking whether you're using JAM. Is it SAP JAM that is forming that more interactive layer on the top? Someone says, and someone else says, what is it you're actually using to create that push pull model?
Yeah, so I think the two questions in there, yes. Right? So yes, we do have the JAM option, but what I'm referring to is not JAM. This is the SAP SuccessFactors cloud-based version. I don't have the version number, but I can pop that up in chat in a bit. But this is the most recent, SuccessFactors version that allows you to do it. What's allowing us to really create the pull? I think the pull is not a functionality of the platform. The pull is really how you position the platform and what is the business problem it solves for. So a lot of the pull in the platform is created because of user-generated content, as an example. A lot of the pull on the platform is created by leadership endorsement, leaders themselves demonstrating or role modeling how they engage with content, how they engage with use cases. That's what creates the pull. So, in our experience, the pull is more, an outcome of the mechanics you're using to position the platform and create ongoing engagement, rather than just, a feature or a functionality of the tool, right?
Fair enough.
Nigel.
Next question. How do you work towards behavior change, particularly if your people are mostly focused on face-to-face learning?
Oh, absolutely. I think, some of it is deliberate and some of it is circumstantial. COVID is a great example. So since we were, like most of the parts of the world, we were in a lockdown for many months in a row. This became the default option. So obviously it accelerated a lot of behavioral change that would have typically taken us longer. That's one. But also, over the course of the last 1 year, we've been also thoughtful about making that shift, demonstrating to larger communities within the organization of what's possible online, talking about use cases and testimonials, talking about learning journeys or learning experience that have been delivered completely end-to-end, right from diagnostics to design to delivery to evaluation. And I think over a period of time, confidence starts building in, both in business leaders who may be sponsoring many of these programs or projects, but also in users, who come in and go through the experience. The other thing that you need to do to build, build behavior change is to also ensure that internal enterprise learning teams are upskilled. So we've spent significant time and effort in upskilling our internal learning teams, in teaching them about modern workplace learning, in teaching them, and this is not intuitive, right? Not every learning manager intuitively understands the skills required to be a learning community manager or the skills required to be a learning experience designer. So, you've got to be thoughtful about how you're upskilling internal teams as well. It's really a combination of how we up the game within the enterprise learning function, how we build confidence amongst business leaders who are sponsoring these programs by demonstrating results and outcomes, and how we build confidence amongst learners by giving them great consumer class experiences that are making a difference.
Thank you. $1 million question, Sunder. How do you balance compliance with general or more generic development? What is the balance? How do you assert that balance in GSK?
Yeah, so I think we are a highly regulated industry, as you can tell. So we do have mandatory compliance courses. The way we do that is compliance is obviously part of the proprietary content. It's not something you can source off the shelf. So we do build our compliance programs in-house. Like I said before, we do have the traditional learning management system as well. So, if it's a compliance module, it will get rolled out via the learning management system. Having said that, we've also seen a significant mindset shift in the way compliance programs are designed. So number one, they're shorter, right? They're very specific. They're not 1 hour, they're 20 minutes perhaps. And we've also done some very early experiments with AI in terms of, specific to compliance programs to say that, does everybody have to recertify themselves on everything all over again on an annual basis? Or can we actually, use basic machine learning and then test and certify people, one, who may need that, and two, test and certify people on components that are relevant to them. So this is really how, this is the direction of travel for us when it comes to compliance-based learning. Right, looks like we've just lost Nigel there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move on and, we'll keep taking questions as we go as Nigel comes back. And again, one of the ways we've been able to drive a lot of engagement is through testimonials, user feedback. So just using our enterprise social platform, we on a consistent basis ask for feedback and endorsement. So these are learners who've gone through a particular learning experience, getting on video, sharing their experience with a wider community, what they've enjoyed, what has resonated with them, and that again leads to significant traction and pull from other members within the community. So again, there's so much that you can do from a comms point of view to sustain and keep the engagement going on an ongoing basis. And I was talking about capability for internal learning teams, and this is such a significant part. We've invested time and effort in ensuring that our own learning teams understand what it requires in terms of, the capabilities that are required. So we've, at a very early stage in our journey, we identified cluster admins. These were people who work in learning teams but are based in different parts of the world. And for us, it was important not only to just get the language capability, because obviously our market, not all our markets operate in English, so it was important that we have the language capabilities in place, but at the same time, it was important that we upskill them on things like how do you build continuous learning, right? How do you do content curation? And like I said, these aren't intuitive, so we spent time and effort in building these skill sets within internal learning teams as we went further along the journey of launching the platform. So something that all organizations have to be thoughtful about as well. And then again, you can improve what you can measure. So fundamentally, you may launch the platform. The question is, what are you tracking? And, how are you holding regions, learning teams across a large area accountable, right? And we had invested significant time in figuring out what is important to report, right? And this is an area where I strongly recommend organizations spend time, because typically a learning system will throw up all type of analytics and dashboards. Much of it may be relevant, some of it may not be relevant. So you've got to be clear about what is it that you want reporting around, what are you going to be tracking, what's important as a metric, and then set some KPIs, user engagement KPIs. So I think sometimes you've got to do both. You've got to set input KPIs, which are how many users do you want on the platform, by when. You want to set engagement KPIs, which is the stickiness, what's the average duration that you want a learner to spend on the platform, what should consumption look like, how many activities should a learner complete. You've got to have some goals around this. And of course, you've got to have your output KPIs, which could be tracked via culture surveys, engagement surveys, improvement in the perceived quality of learning that the organization provides. And then of course there are hardcore commercial KPIs, which are more in terms of skill index or commercial outcomes that that your business may be more interested in. So you've got to have a KPI dashboard, literally, to say what are you tracking, and then have a review mechanism on a fortnightly and a monthly basis. And that will ensure that the learning platform is not just some standalone project that got launched once and you leave it at that, but it really is part of the ongoing conversation between learning teams but as well as business teams. And then moving on further, these are just some examples. I was talking about the lockdown, just in the March to June period. This is data for a 3-month period. The region that I represent, which is emerging markets, and we've got 10,000 plus users, and we had significant traction. So we used this as an opportunity to double down on learning engagement. Obviously, we were strongly of the belief that, learning is also now a new currency of employee experience. And with that mindset and belief, we really doubled down in the lockdown period to meaningfully enable and engage our people, many of whom were limited, restricted to their homes. And these are salespeople. These are people who are used to going out in the markets, meeting customers face to face, and they're sitting at home now for over 3 months. So we used that opportunity to double down, and we've seen fantastic traction. And we've seen a lot of behavior shifts, many circumstantial. So in some ways, COVID has obviously accelerated the digital adoption from a learning point of view, but we're also hoping that we will be able to sustain a lot of these behaviors even as things, as markets start to recover and countries start opening up gradually. And just in terms of the ROI, like I said, we've thought about ROI on 3 key pivots. The number one is really engagement, and we've seen consistent improvement. And these, what you see are numbers that we've just reported a few weeks back. These are our engagement scores within the region in which I operate, and we did a survey in September 2019, which was 6 months into the launch of the learning platform, and then we did a survey in May of 2020. And just over a 6 to 7 month period, you can see right from engagement to developing capability to people feeling that they have an opportunity to grow and develop on all of the key metrics that you can sort of link back to learning and capability. We've had a positive traction. So that's some great qualitative feedback on how learning is making a difference, at least in the perceived employee experience and employee engagement. And I think that's an important ROI component, in addition to drawing a line back to commercial outcomes, which I'm sure all of us do for different businesses that we represent. And again, in summary, I would say, if you're on this journey to launch a learning platform, do you have learning community managers? And again, what I do want to highlight here is you don't need people in job titles of learning community managers. You need people trained in the skill set of how do you manage learning communities, and that's what we did. Are you going to have regular connects? Are you going to have people who are sort of championing the learning platform? And we call them learning admins, but then they can be in any other role. Do you have strong partnerships with learning partners, right? The external ecosystem is growing. So, are you limited by just 1 or 2 people, or does your platform allow open integrations with newer content providers that may come up, as an example? Are you refreshing your content on a dynamic basis? So just to give you a very specific example, we have a 15-day timeline. So every 15 days, we do a structured content refresh on the platform, right? So we will do both a user interface refresh, but we will also refresh the actual content. So every 15 days, there's a slightly newer look to the platform. There's obviously newer content that could be relevant to what may be happening in the business at that point in time. Again, are you communicating in a robust fashion and in an ongoing way, right? So we have a communication plan, which is an organic communication plan. It's not a one and done. Every month, we are thinking about what can we communicate about the learning platform. It could be a great use case, it could be a user testimonial, it could be a new piece of content, it could be an example of how a business solved a problem, and one of the ingredients of that solution was a learning journey hosted on the platform. So the stories could vary, but are you storytelling on an ongoing basis? Really important. And again, how do you integrate? So, our platforms are obviously integrated with our other HR systems. So it's important that, you get sort of a clear, comprehensive picture, because learning and capability is one part of the employee experience. And then, of course, there are other parts. So are you able to get that integrated point of view? And that's super important when you're sort of driving the broader business goals. So that's been our experience. Again, like I said, it's not so much a success story, but really a reflection of the journey that we've been on over the last 1 year or so. And I can see that there are lots of questions. I'm happy to, answer other questions that you may have. Nigel.
Yes, thank you. What I've done, Sunder, is put back that slide, because that's a very useful final slide with areas that top tips really, and areas that you covered. There's a really important question which I don't want to let go before and forget about. How do you manage different cultural approaches and attitudes across countries? How does GSK manage that? I can't remember how many countries you're in, but more than a few. Is that you have a specific role for India and you're autonomous, or how do you align with what's going on? That's a great question,
and that's a reality. So the way we look at it is, there are some things which are standard, and there are some things that are locally driven, right? So if you remember, I spoke about having learning admins in different parts of the world. These learning admins actually bring in, the perspective. So they bring in the cultural insights that we need. So let me actually, so we've got multiple languages.
Do you have multiple languages?
Multiple
do you have stuff in
context,
more than English?
Ways of working, and this is where our learning admins come into play. So, we've got folks in China, in the Philippines, Dubai, Turkey, Brazil, and everyone's trained on the standard, but then, of course, they bring in the understanding of the local cultural nuances. So they're able to actually not just translate what we're building centrally into what's meaningful locally, but they're also able to create content from within the market that may be very local. So one of the ways to manage this is, number one, to have clear standards around what's going to be consistent across the world or across the region, and what's flexible. And number two, have teams that are trained and empowered to do what is appropriate locally. So sometimes we build proprietary content that gets built centrally and then gets translated into 10 different languages. But there are many times where teams will build something that's very unique and relevant just for Brazil as an example and has no relevance outside of Brazil. And that's totally okay as well, right?
So there's a lot of trust built in. You're not checking, or someone isn't checking what someone in Brazil does. You trust that you've set the standards. It's their job to maintain the appropriate quality and manage the whole thing. Second one related to trust. Can I just ask this, and you can put the two together, and that is, how do you make sure that user-generated content is, and someone said, a wild west of potentially duplicative and possibly bad quality content? That's from Alison. So how do you, is that based on trust? Is it the community, or do you have other ways of handling?
Well, I think you've said it, right? I mean, you've got to trust the learner.
Content.
You've got to be clear about what is expected. You've got to trust your learners. And this is where, again, the learning community managers have a role to play in terms of just sanitizing what's appropriate. Now, having said that, it's literally impossible and maybe not even practical to be reviewing hundreds of pieces of content that get generated. So that's not possible. But our experience has been that over a period of time, people figure out what is appropriate. People figure out, what's going to be accepted. At the end of the day, there is social currency attached to sharing content. So if you really think about it, people want to share appropriate stuff because there's social currency, social credibility that's attached to that. So if you are able to create the right value proposition about how sharing or collaborating as a behavior builds social capital, you're going to invest less and less time in cleaning up, right?
Yes. It's absolutely true. Yeah, that's clear. And Andy Wooler has posted a definition of community managers. So, a job description of community managers. So that could be very helpful and complement what you've said to us already. Sunder, I have to say that the level of support from your audience is absolutely amazing. So where people have asked questions, other people have jumped in and given answers. So it's a whole community supporting this talk, and there's a lot of expertise in the room. So I'd like just to pay tribute to those people who've spent an awful lot of time responding to other people and dealing with some pretty technical questions. But let's move on. Do you measure real engagement, and if your content is delivered, whether your content actually delivered?
No, great question. So I think we do it around the following spectrums. Number one, content is really an outcome of the problem that you're trying to solve for. So the first thing we define within the commercial organization is, what are you solving for, right? And what does good look like? That's really the starting point. The starting point is, of course, not content. Now, if what you're solving for necessitates creation of content or creation of a learning journey to that effect, then you want to define what does good engagement look like. And this could be completion rates, as basic as that, but it could also be the quality of engagement, the time people spend, how much are people sharing. All of this gets tracked, right? So these could be other metrics. And finally, you measure against what you started with. So if you're creating something which is specific to sales, what is pragmatic, right? What sort of a delta are you expecting over a 3 to 6 month or 1 year period? And then you measure back at that point in time, right? So that's how we do it. What we've also done is we've created, it's easy to do in a commercial learning organization, the one that I represent. We obviously have internal markers for what sales improvement looks like. And then we're able to look at those internal markers, the selling outcome markers, which are more behavioral led, and then draw a correlation with actual sales performance, which is a business metric, right? So it's slightly more easier if you're in a commercial learning organization versus the traditional leadership and behavioral training organization. But it's quite possible, yeah.
Okay. What about content curation? Do you have specific content curators that you
Yeah,
employ, or
great
is that
question.
part
So,
of everybody's job?
I
How do
wouldn't
you
say it's part
manage
of everybody's
curation?
job. Everyone's expected to do. Essentially, there are people who are learning community managers, like I said before, and it's part of their portfolio to do this on an ongoing basis. But what happens is, everyone's free to recommend pieces of content that could be great, and then the learning community managers can sort of really tie it all in nicely within a learning pathway or a learning journey. But again, no one person has captive knowledge on curation, because things are coming up all the time. So we encourage users to share what may be interesting and relevant, and post evaluation, if it fits the purpose, then we're always very happy to sort of include this within a pathway.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to move to the wrap-up slide, Sunder, now, simply because on the wrap-up slide, we've got some articles that you have selected. If people want to copy and paste from that screen, there are 5 of them. I'm also going to reference the paper that Andy Wooler suggested for community managers. So that, and if there's anything else that has emerged from the discussion, or that comes up now, we'll paste it in that column. So there is the list of resources. Just we've got 2 or 3 minutes. Just a couple of final questions. Where are you going, Sunder? What is the next stage in your development?
I think, just
how are
like
you going to take this forward?
most of the mature organizations, we've got a clear roadmap of where we want the platform to evolve. And our evolution is going to be on multiple fronts. So our evolution is going to be on the content front in terms of integrating with more richer content providers. That's one end of the spectrum. But our evolution is also going to be on the platform front itself, in terms of integrating modern technology like AI and machine learning. How can we make our content more personalized? How can we have very clear, specific recommendations that are of interest to people? So that's the direction we're going. I think as a general principle, what I'm always telling my teams is, the way all of us are consuming information, entertainment, education, it's all evolving, right? So as learning professionals, our best shot is to just keep our eyes and ears open, right? Keep our eyes and ears open, track what's happening in the consumer world, and I think those are great proxies for what people will expect from enterprise platforms within any organization. So I think that's the direction I would want our teams to move into.
Good, thank you. And I've just pasted on there the fact that the recording and the slides and the supporting documents will be available at the Learning Technologies Digital Hub next week. So we haven't lost anything. There were massive amounts of questions in the question box. The chat has gone on and on and on. All of that will be preserved and people can go back to that. So the next question is the dashboard, Sunder. Maybe this will be the final question. How do you make sure the dashboard is right for your team, but also for, I guess, for those people in management in GSK who are not directly involved in learning? You need a dashboard that identifies what you've achieved for the organization.
That's really important.
How did you build the
Again,
dashboard?
I would go back to it's a first principles approach, right? You start with what does the business want to see? And again, increasingly we've found that the business is agnostic of things like completion numbers. I mean, they don't care. What they want to really know is, are people more proficient today than they were yesterday? So if you can find a meaningful way of answering that question, are people getting more proficient on identified job-specific competencies over a period of time? That's the question that your dashboard should answer, and a lot of what we've built is to that effect. If you don't start with that, then you're going to get a really busy dashboard which answers all type of questions, because frankly the platform can, but these may not be questions that are making your business leaders lose sleep. So my recommendation to any other organization would be, build a dashboard, have a business leader as a co-creator, double down on what questions they want answered, and then you can work with your provider to figure out what's a meaningful way to visually represent that at a certain frequency, fortnightly, monthly, or whatever the case may be.
Thank you. I've just pasted into the files to download your presentation. So if anyone wants to download it, it's there. You can also get it next week. So it's there. I've also added a link from Teresa, which is Playing Success Innovative Project Improvement of Learning Performance. So that is a paper that she's recommended as a helpful addition. Right, Sunder, we're at the end. We need to stop absolutely bang on time. So can I just thank everybody for participating? We've had 300 people, I hope all of them profoundly engaged, certainly by the comments. We've had a lot of really useful information transmitted and a lot of people saying thank you, Sunder, for the presentation. Thank you for the clarity and thank you for the openness with which you've shared what you've done in GSK. So I really like to thank you, Sunder, and thank everybody for their contributions, and I hope this has been a really useful session as part of the summer forum. So thank you very much indeed. I'll close the session at this point with yet a final thanks to
Thank you,
Sunder
Nigel. I've really enjoyed the
the
interaction, and
so
let's keep the my submission to all colleagues who've joined the call today is just keep the conversation going. You can find me on LinkedIn, so happy to connect and have a chat. So thank you for making the time.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the session and everything has been recorded. I sincerely hope that not one syllable from all of your contributions has been lost, and we will have that ready all for downloading and reviewing next week. So I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you so much indeed for everything that you've done, and thank you